verse 1, and then we'll skip ahead to 7 through 14. Hear now the good news of our Lord and Savior. On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, "Give this person your place." And then in disgrace you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, he said to the host, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. I came across a book once called All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. The essence of the book is pretty self-explanatory. The author goes in depth and breaks apart these lessons, but really his point is everything you needed to learn to be a good person, to be a good human, are the lessons we teach people in kindergarten. He states 16 lessons that he learned in kindergarten. They are: share everything, play fair, don't hit people, put things back where you found them, clean up your own mess, don't take things that aren't yours, say you're sorry when you hurt somebody, wash your hands before you eat. This is one of my favorite ones. It simply just says flush. It's one of those lessons we learn. Lesson 10, warm cookies and cold milk are good for you. Live a balanced life. Learn some, drink some, draw some, paint some, and sing and dance and play and work every day some. Take a nap every afternoon. When you go out into the world, watch out for traffic. Hold hands and stick together. Be aware of wonder. Remember the little seed in the styrofoam cup. The roots go down, the plant goes up, and no one really knows how or why. But we are all like that. Goldfish and hamsters and white mice and even the little seed in the styrofoam cup, they all die. So do we. And then remember the Dick and Jane books, and the first word you learn, the biggest word of all, look. It's a great list. That's of the 16 things he said we learn as kindergartners. Imagine if we as adults acted the way we tell children in kindergarten to act. I read that list, and one of them was share everything. We really harp on that to kids. Share your toys, share your snack, share this, share that. Until we get old enough to determine that sharing doesn't matter. We're pretty anti-hitting people until they deserve it. In kindergarten, we're always told to buddy up. Buddy up to go everywhere. You should always have your buddy. And then we become adults and we want to do everything on our own. It amazes me, the lessons, the 16 lessons there, that we just completely forget when we become adults. Even down to flush. I don't know how many public bathrooms you go to that people have forgotten that lesson. We just forget them. We don't think they matter to us, but they matter to kindergartners for some reason. Why is that? Why is it so easy for us to tell kids to share, but we don't? Is it because we're adults and we know better? We know better now. Is it because we have a bigger world view and we can see past the toys and sharing just cookies and milk? Is it because we simply have a choice now and kids don't? Is that why we don't follow those 16 life lessons? Or did we just simply forget? I bring this up not to go into a long sermon on why we don't live what we preach or why we don't live the same things that we teach kids are important. But I bring up this list of things because it's so elementary. Because it's so simple. It's basic life lessons. I bring this up because I think if Jesus were to write a book on Christianity, he wouldn't write a 300-page book about what to do. If Jesus were going to write a book on following him, a book of the basics we need to learn to follow him, the basics that we harp on to kids but forget ourselves. I think if Jesus was writing a book, he would call it All I Really Needed to Know, I Learned Around the Table. I think that each time Jesus gathers in the Bible around a table, he gives us the perfect example of a Christian life. I believe that when Jesus sits down for a meal with someone, he gives us all the lessons we need to be a good follower of him. He gives us all the teachings we need to be a good Christian. And so today I want to break down this meal in the lessons that we learn, the simple lessons that Jesus teaches us around a table. Lesson number 1, everything can be worship, even a meal. Our text begins with telling us that they have gathered for a Sabbath meal. They're gathering together on Sunday afternoon to have a meal, and not just a meal, they describe it as a Sabbath meal, a worship meal. I take this to mean that even the act of gathering together to eat is a moment of Sabbath, is a moment of worship. It's an opportunity to reconnect with God and with Christ. That's what Sabbath is. Sabbath is all about connecting with God. And if we're having a meal together, a Sabbath meal, we're connecting with God. When we gather to share a meal together, I don't think we're just filling our bellies. We're not just getting our daily required nutrients. I think that meal can be a time where we're opening ourselves to Christ, and we are in a way worshiping God. I wonder what it would look like if Christians around this world treated our meals together as acts of worship. What if we saw the meal not as separated from the service? Like on homecoming, what if when we went outside to partake of that meal, the service didn't end when I gave a benediction, but continued outside? I believe that the table we share for communion, but also when we sit down, like last Sunday for lunch after Ruth's baptism, that is worship. That is a time of praising God and living into his community. At the table, I think we can learn that every moment of our lives can be worship. Eating a meal can be worship, but so too can be walking down the street. Sunday morning can be worship, but so too can be going to a ball game. We can make that worship. Sunday morning is worship, but so too can be sitting in someone's living room. Jesus teaches us at the table that worship is more than sitting in church on Sunday mornings. Worship can be a meal. Worship is any time we gather to open ourselves to Christ. Worship for Christians has to be more than Sunday morning. Lesson number 2, I learned you can't go it alone. Around the table, I learned you can't do it alone. The Christian life is not a life you can live by yourself. Even Jesus needed to find himself some disciples. Even Jesus knew he couldn't go to the cross by himself. He needed somebody else to help him with his cross. Notice in the story where Jesus is gathered. He's at the home of the Pharisees. You know those people, the Pharisees, the ones that want to kill him? Those Pharisees, the ones that aren't really cool with what he's teaching? Those people who really, really hate him? It even says they're watching him closely. He's the suspect that you're keeping your eye on so he doesn't take something from your purse during the meal. They're watching him. They don't trust him. He's there with the people who are trying to arrest him. And I've said this before, but I think this points to the fact that you can't do this Christian life alone, that Jesus would rather eat with the Pharisees than eat by himself. He would rather gather with people who don't like him than sit alone. He would rather gather with people who he disagrees with than live by himself. You see, the Christian life can't be done in isolation. It just can't. We have to be together. We have to gather as one body, even if parts of those bodies don't agree. Even if parts of those bodies are trying to arrest the other part, we have to be together. We need each other. We need each other to pick us up when we fall down. We need each other to support us when life gets rough. We need people to celebrate with us. Celebrating alone is not as fun as with a community. We need people who will cry with us. I learned around the table in this story that to be a Christian means we need to live, and actually live as a part of a community. Not just be in the midst of people, but live with community. Number 3, the Christian life can't be earned. Jesus tells the people when they gather for dinner, they are to sit at the worst seat at the table. Sit at the worst spot. Get as far away as you can from the head of the table. Don't be right next to the host. But wait for your host to invite you forward. He says, be humble and you will be exalted. But I don't think that means we get to control God. I don't think that means like, okay, I'm going to try to be humble and then God will see me and exalt me. I'm going to try to appear humble. I'm going to sit at the lowest spot knowing that God will see me and call me forward. That's not what it is. It's not controlling God to be exalted. What I take this to mean is that only when we realize we don't deserve a high seat, that we will be exalted. It's only when we believe there is nothing we can do to get into heaven that we are actually start to earn a little heaven. That we actually start to get a little heaven. It's only when our actions are out of pure love and not out of a desire to get a better seat that we might be exalted. It goes back to the question, why do we love our enemies? Why do we do good things for people? To be praised for it? To get a few extra heaven points? So others will see us as good people? This is a simple one I go back to. Why do we hold the door for people? Why do I do it? I can tell you sometimes I do it so I just don't look like a jerk. That's the reason I hold the door open. That person might think I'm a jerk. And so I'm going to hold the door open for them. I'm going to hold the door because I don't want to look rude. Not all the time. Sometimes I do it out of love, but sometimes I do it just because I don't want them to think I'm a bad person. I don't want them to think poorly of me. That's why I do it. Think about it. Next time you hold the door open, what's going through your mind? Or why do we pass a couple dollars to the homeless person? Do we do it so I can go tell my friends at church that I passed a couple dollars to the homeless person? Do I do it just so I can pat myself back and say I did my good deed for the day? I can go on. What I learned around Jesus' table is that we are only exalted when we realize that what we do doesn't earn us any more heaven. That we can't gain any more heaven than what Jesus is already giving to us. We don't sit at the worst seat so we can move up. We sit at the worst seat because that's where we belong. We can't earn our salvation. And finally, number 4. It's the last lesson I learned, and I think this sums up all of the lessons, and it means all means all. I don't know if you've seen those bumper stickers where it says y'all means everyone. That's sort of what this last lesson is. Y'all means everyone. Jesus came so that all may have life and have it abundantly. Jesus died on the cross so that all may be cleansed and that all will be forgiven. Jesus came to set the oppressed free, give sight to the blind, and lift up the poor. And you could go on and on and on and add lines of who Jesus came for. At the table, Jesus reminds us that he came for all. He tells the host, don't invite only those who can pay you back. Invite the beggars. Invite the widows. Invite the homeless. Invite the immigrant. Invite the 9-to-5 workers struggling to get by. Invite the children. Invite the poor. Invite the sick. Invite the needy. Invite all of those who you don't see as worthy. See, this is what the Christian life means. All means all. Jesus doesn't beat around the bush when he says, I came for all. Because all of us are unworthy of sitting next to the host. All of us are unable to pay back the host, which is God. We can't pay him back for this. We can't pay him back for each breath that we draw. We can't pay him back for our families. We can't pay him back for the grace that he gives us. But yet he invites us. You see, not one of us deserved to be invited by God to this place. And yet Christ's table is big enough for us all. Not one of us deserved for Christ to die on a cross for us. And yet he did it for all of us. That's what I learned at the table. These are the lessons I learned at the table. That this Christian life is not something we earned or deserved. It's not something given to us even. It is something given to us even though we can't repay it. You see, the Christian life is an invitation into this type of table sharing. We are invited to share the table with all who society says doesn't belong here. We are told to invite all to his table. It's pretty simple. Y'all means everyone. There's no confusing it for Jesus. It's not all but. No, it's all. No stipulations, no requirements. He says everyone is worthy at his dinner. And I wonder, what would it look like for the churches of this world to actually believe that? To put that into action, that everyone is invited to this table. What would it look like if we lived out this story, if we lived a Christian life as seen in this parable? What if instead of adding all these rules and lessons and criteria to the Christian faith, we just went back to kindergarten and kept it simple? Share. Have a buddy. Warm cookies and milk are good. Flush. The simple, the basics. What if we took this Christian life and just looked at how Jesus eats a meal? And that's how we lived. That eating together is worship. And so too can every moment of the day. That it must be done together. You can't be a solo Christian. If we aren't active in the community, it just won't work. That the cross is a gift that we don't get to earn, and we might as well stop trying. And that y'all means everyone. I spent the last 3 years reading book after book, parsing out what these things mean. But I think it comes down to these simple lessons that Jesus sees at a meal. And so in a second here, we're going to read about a different meal together. We're going to read about communion. And I think we'll see the same elements if you pay attention to what is invited in this meal together. I believe this meal is us breaking down the rules of this world and saying, put that to the side. This is what matters about Christianity. Because I believe the lessons we learn around a table can change this world. If we live these lessons that I learned and that we have learned together around a table, I think we can change this world. The lessons we find in the sharing of the bread in the cup, I believe, are all we need to bring about the kingdom and to bring peace on earth. So, church, let us just go back to kindergarten. Amen.